Hi there and good afternoon. I'm Brandy Smith in the KHU 11 newsroom. We're standing by waiting to hear from the Texas House Republican Caucus. The plan is for them to discuss the Democrats who made the trip to Washington, D.C., as well as some of the agenda items off of the special session. We're now more than halfway through the special session that began in early July. It's slated to wrap up on August 6th. Democrats say they'll stay in Washington, D.C. until then, preventing the Texas House from reaching a quorum. More than 2/3 of House members have to be in the chamber in order to proceed with business. Because more than 50 House Democrats are in Washington, D.C., the House can't do any business right now. The Senate can. The Texas Senate is still working on some of those agenda items laid out by Governor Abbott, but the House has basically ceased to do anything for the past couple of weeks, ever since July 12th, when Democrats jumped on that chartered plane and headed to Washington, D.C. We did hear from Democrats earlier today. They were putting out a call to Black churches to join in unity with them. Also, they were presented with a check from the Missionary Baptist Ministers Conference for more than $11,000 for them to continue their efforts to stay in Washington, D.C., to keep pushing Congress to pass federal voting laws. Again, we are waiting to hear from the Texas House Republican Caucus, slated to hop on any moment now. They were expected to start speaking at 1 o'clock. And as we wait for them, just a rundown of what's happened in this past week, although it looks like they're getting going here. Hold on just a sec. Let's bring this up.
Accurately described so that people can
there
decide.
We go. We're just waiting for that Zoom link to fire up so that press conference can get going. But in the past week, we did see a Democrat leave Washington, D.C., return to Austin, who said he wanted to work with Republicans on the voting reform laws that are under consideration in the Texas legislature during the special session. But he has since returned to Washington, D.C. That's State Rep Philip Cortez. More than 50 Democrats are in Washington, D.C. right now, holding up progress. We've heard from Republicans, House Speaker Dade Phelan, who sent a chartered plane to Washington, D.C., asking Democrats to board it. None took him up on that offer. We've also seen multiple Democrats test positive for coronavirus, despite having been vaccinated. We got an update on their condition earlier today at a press conference.
This meeting is being recorded.
They should get an update soon. It appears that we are joining this meeting. Just getting all the kinks ironed out. There we go.
Process again. First off, welcome to our statewide media availability. It's hosted by the Texas House Republican Caucus. It's part of a series we're providing on the topics in the call for the special session. Our election integrity bill is not the only bill on the call. However, it has received the most attention. We did a briefing a week ago and want to make sure that we have a time for you to ask your questions and express any concerns you might have. We want to be sure that House Bill 3 is accurately reported upon so people can have an informed opinion as to its merits. Before we get to today's topic, I want to say a few words about how the special session has gone. It's been 2 weeks since the Democrats walked off the job and took an all-expense-paid trip to Washington, D.C. In the process, they've left behind their constitutional obligation to represent their constituents, and they left behind legislation that would provide, among other things, a 13th check for our retired teachers, funding for foster care providers, property tax relief for our seniors, and bail reform to keep hardened criminals off the street. We can't act on any of this unless these Democrats return to Austin. And in fact, we have a unique moment in time to do that, as the comptroller's letter today documented that we did not have money available to do the things we want to do this special session during the last regular session, but we have it now. So the time to act is now. So I'm joined today, I want to turn it to these two good folks, by a couple of experts on this topic. Chairman Andrew Murr, to my left here, is the author of House Bill 3. And before serving the legislature was a county judge. Chairwoman Stephanie Click is the past chair of the House Elections Committee And before serving the legislature, she was the Republican chairwoman of Tarrant County. They'll each provide some opening remarks, and then we'll open up for some questions. So with that, Chairman Murr, I defer to you to talk about your bill.
Thank you, Chairman Murphy. Just to give a couple of, I think important points to make about House Bill 3. I understand that a debate on voting practices has provoked a passionate response, and that has occurred both inside the legislature and outside around the state of Texas and across the National Debate Forum. It's regrettable that much discussion has been based on misconceptions and hyperbole, and I've explained that in the past, and I will reiterate that. And I've remained disheartened that some of our colleagues chose to leave the state of Texas instead of fully participate in the democratic process in the Texas House. And I do look forward to their return so that we can pick up where we've left off. Going into the special session, you are very familiar with the fact that we engaged in stakeholder meetings with members, both Democrat and Republican. I explained this in as much in the bill layout that I provided to the select committee that heard this bill during the special session. And that during that process received input from members, including Democrats. And obviously what we've seen now as part of the product is a pick up where we left off approach from the regular session in what is now House Bill 3. Importantly, I will point out that it provides uniformity and consistency in our election laws so that they can be applied in a consistent manner across the state of Texas, so that regardless of what county you are in, you as a voter have an equal opportunity to vote, to follow the same framework that's put in place for voting, and to ensure that your legally cast ballot is counted. And I think that that is an underpinning to what the bill is about. Specifically, I have mentioned repeatedly that the legislative intent is expressed on page 2 of the bill, and I will quote for all of us again. It is intended to provide this uniform and consistency throughout the state of Texas to reduce the likelihood of fraud and the conduct of our elections, to protect the secrecy of the ballot, promote voter access, and ensure that all legally cast ballots are counted, so that Texans can remain confident that we have a reliable election system. And so I think that that is very important. What I also want to point out are things that we hear about that are not in the bill. And again, I did this during my layout in front of the committee. It does not include any language referring to souls to the polls voting on Sunday. We heard about that during the regular session. We also heard about objections to a judicial discard of voting results without actually determining how the votes were cast and which candidate received the votes. Those provisions are not part of this bill, and that's through the effort of listening to my colleagues here in the House to pay attention to what we have there. Finally, I will give you just a quick overview that the bill itself is pending right now in our special session. And my door remains open to all of my colleagues for continued discussion, questions, and opportunities to visit to always make good legislation better. And so with that, I know that we might cover some other topics, but that's just an overview of House Bill 3.
Thank you, Representative Murr. And so this is a bill that's had, as you say, a lot of hands in it, and it's reflective of that.
It is.
And when people say, is there room for compromise, we got to acknowledge there's been compromise.
There has been, and it is well reflected by the fact that while during the regular session, which we're fresh off of between January and into May, we saw election integrity legislation come through the House. We saw that bill leave the House floor with multiple Democrat and Republican amendments to it. And then those amendments, many of which actually remained in the conference committee report whenever the Senate and the House were trying to finalize terms. So what you see in front of us is not something that started from scratch, but it actually incorporates a lot of those good ideas, both Democrat and Republican, in the bill that we have today.
Excellent. Chairwoman Click, I'd like you to talk about some of the specifics of the bill. You have some experience that helps underscore why those reforms are needed, and the broad experience of multiple election cycles that it talks about why that makes sense.
Sure. One of the big things about HB3 is it bans ballot harvesting or trafficking. Our current laws are unclear, and we need to address it. Individuals who go out and traffic or harvest ballots typically work for multiple candidates. And the mail-in ballots require security. Some of the individuals that use that method of voting are very vulnerable. They're disabled, they're elderly, very easy to exploit these individuals. Most election cases prosecuted in our state are related to mail-in voting. Identification for mailing in a ballot is required at the request of a ballot and when sending it in. Many other states require copies of the ID. This bill only requires those numbers be included on the envelope. House Bill 3 also provides a cure period. Those that do not fill out their paperwork correctly on their mail-in ballot. In the past, those votes were just thrown out and those voters, their votes didn't count. We now have provision in House Bill 3 that allows a voter to correct those mistakes and cure it so that they can be counted. This bill also makes clear that what the rights of a poll watcher are. All we're doing here is essentially clarifying existing law regarding poll watchers. Poll watchers and poll workers are partisan. They're appointed by political parties and candidates. They're there to watch the election and not get involved in the actual process of voting, but to make sure to be the eyes and ears of a candidate or political party or the authors of a measure that the conduct of the election is being done according to law. Our Democrat colleagues need to return. If they're interested in moving forward, we must have them come back home here to Texas and let's negotiate and move this bill forward.
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie. At this point, we're going to defer to our attendees, virtual attendees, and thank you for doing that, to ask questions. We're going to follow the convention. I think we've all had to learn, unfortunately, of raising your hand. We're not going to filter the questions. We're going to take them all, but we just want to have some order to that. So we have Jordan, our Executive Director, Jordan Watt, running the control panel, I guess. And so, Jordan, if you'll tell us who's up and when, we'll proceed with some questions. So please, folks, ask us questions about the bills. That's why the experts are here to address that. So. Okay, Eleanor, good afternoon. We're ready for your question.
Hi, yes, sir. Thank you for taking my question. I just wanted to touch base with you. Given the time that's left in the special session, even if, say House Democrats were all to come back today or tomorrow, is there enough time realistically to pass the various items that are on the call?
Absolutely. Eleanor, your question about timing, it's really getting critical. We don't have a lot of time left, but in a special session, there's a lot less clutter. There are fewer bills in calendars. The Senate bills have already passed. As Chairman Murr said, his bill is pending and be kicked out. So we can move quickly. But Eleanor, that garage door is closing rather. And I would also add, there are certain measures that outside of this bill that require some constitutional amendments. I'm thinking about the bail reform, potentially property tax relief, that could be in jeopardy altogether. In other words, we'll come back for another special session, but if we don't do some of these things now, that ship sails and unfortunately those needs will be left behind. So it's critical they come back now. And as you point out, and I would put out very clearly, it's a matter of days. Christian, we're ready for you, sir.
Hey, good afternoon. Kind of a long question here, but how did you feel about discussions with Representative Cortez on HB3, and did his leaving surprise you? Do you blame either House Speaker Phelan or Governor Abbott for allowing Representative Cortez to leave the state again? And what does this do to your confidence that a quorum will be restored before the end of the special session?
Christian, I apologize. I know you're asking about Representative Cortez, and I'll do my best to address it, but it was kind of hard to hear all your specifics. And it's a sound quality thing, not a volume thing. But Christian, let me just say, Representative Cortez, we value his opinion as one of our colleagues. He's his own person. He can do what he wants to do. We're pleased that he wanted to, come back and work on the legislation. We're hoping he can return from Washington with more of his colleagues to continue that process. But we certainly understand why the speaker did what he did, and that certainly is his right to do so.
No other hands raised at this time.
Well, I will just say this bill is available online. It's no secret. It's a very, very clear bill. If you don't have more questions now, I think that's because we're not hearing any really substantive concerns. We hear some inflammatory rhetoric, Jim Crow 2 and things like that. We hear about things that aren't in the bill, and hear the people who understand what's in the bill and how the process works. And we wish our colleagues would engage this very same process as they did for 24 hours was the hearing that y'all had, something like that. But who's counting? So I think it's interesting to me that we don't have more inquiries as to the specifics and the concerns of this bill. And I think, great. I'm Catholic, so I'm sorry if I'm playing the guilt card with any of you people. So Jordan, who do we have up? Okay, Alexa, good afternoon. You're up.
Hi, good afternoon. I wanted to ask, you all are signaling here, come back. We are ready to continue working with you all. And I wanted to ask, how much room are you all seeing in terms of possibly negotiating on this? Obviously the House version of this bill during the regular session did not include things like the ban on 24-hour voting or the ban on curbside voting. This time it did. What are some of the things you all are considering that may be on the table as part of those negotiations?
Yeah, Andy, if you want to address that, that'd be great.
Alexa, I'll put it to you this way. So even before the special session occurred, and I made it very clear that there has been dialogue amongst members, including both Democrats and Republicans, about what an election integrity and security bill would look like and what provisions would be in there. Arguably, input has been received from many different members and from some advocacy groups as to their concepts and worries about application of proposed policy. That is an ongoing process, and I'll simply iterate what I said and provided to the select committee during the hearing, is that I have an open door policy, and I have continued to visit with colleagues and try to answer their questions and help them evaluate if they understand what's in the bill or if they have issues or concerns with that. During the hearing itself, I explained both to Democrat and Republican members that asked me questions that I was more than just interested in sitting down with them and looking at those concepts further, and that has not changed. The only delay has been that we're not all in the same building in order to do that. And so I look forward to doing that, but that continues to persist. As far as the topics or substance, which is what your question is about, that many of those were raised during the hearing itself, and you can go back and look at our 14 hours of testimony and find the spots in which members either said they had a concern, a question, or an issue, or wanted to take up something that they think may not have been properly addressed in the bill. And I told them, I'm happy to sit down with you and visit further, and that continues to this day.
Alexa, I'll just add to that. Chairman Murr showed me a document he had that identified what suggestions had been provided by which Democrats in the process. So a lot of that has already occurred. Yes, the door is open and we could continue to do that, but at a point where we are now, we're kind of waiting for the substantive concerns to emerge so they can be addressed. And of course, that's what committee hearings about. That's what we're on the floor together. That's what we do. We're talking to each other. And so that can very much continue. But it's very clear this bill has greatly improved by some standards and certainly been reflective of the input from our colleagues. But that could certainly continue. But we need them here to do that. We really do. Okay, Kristen, hopefully our connection's a little better this time around.
Hey, if you can't hear me this time, I can also type it in the chat. But here's my question, my second question. Representative Murr has said multiple times the goal is to get to uniform rules, but shouldn't the goal be uniform outcomes, especially when you consider lines in major cities are significantly longer than smaller cities and towns, and that could potentially discourage voting?
Let me start with that, and Andy, I'll kick it off to you. But to me, and I'm not in the midst of all this election integrity details, But the concept of, one person, one vote, when you have one part of your district with one set of rules, another part of the district with a different set of rules, it's pretty clear to me that that's unfair to one group or the other, depending on your point of view. And that's why the uniformity is as a principle is so important. So,
Chairman Murphy, Christian, I did not understand what you said. It was very echoey in your background. And so I apologize for that. It sounded kind of like the classroom teacher from the Peanuts. So I feel like Charlie Brown at the moment. I just couldn't understand what you were saying. But
Kristen, can you shoot us a text if you like, and we'll pay attention to that, if that works for you.
Sure thing. I'll go ahead and text you real quick.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, let me just see if he can get a quick text in. Traveling at the speed of light. All right. So the question says, Representative Murray said multiple times his goal was to get uniform rules, but should the goal be uniform outcomes? Oh Lord, especially when you consider lines in a major city are significantly longer than smaller cities and towns.
yeah, Christian, so to speak to that, when we talk about uniformity and consistency, we're talking about the application of the election code. And so as you're well aware, the state of Texas has an elections code that is used in order for us to properly lay out, drive, and guide our volunteers and our professionals as they conduct elections so that we can all feel that we have a reliable election system. What we've seen, though, especially was prevalent in the last cycle, and what you heard as far as testimony goes during the committee hearing on HB3 was that some jurisdictions chose to creatively interpret some provisions in the elections code, and that did result in a change in the application of some provisions, so that you found that voters voting in one county certainly didn't necessarily get to operate under the same framework as voters in another county in another part of the state of Texas. And so when you look at it in overall equality and fairness, if we have a creative interpretation of the election code that doesn't result in consistency across the board. And I think the goal here, and really few people will disagree with me, is we do want that consistency. Whether you have a multi-county jurisdiction in which they're having an election, that can actually raise concerns, or it's simply that one part of the state has a different way of treating things, and we want that to be uniform throughout. And so at the end of the day, when I say uniform and consistent, I mean that throughout the state of Texas. Now, if you dive down into the election code, you will also see that there are opportunities for flexibility given at the local level. For example, when we talk about early voting hours, this bill actually expands the minimum period of time for early voting hours during weekdays and weekends. But we also provide that level of flexibility for the local jurisdiction to choose what works best, both for its volunteers and election workers, as well as its constituents there. And so that is something that's well balanced in Texas and seems to work well. And I think we want to continue that opportunity.
And Chairman Murr, would you also talk about the expansion vis-a-vis the move in the population bracket? I think it's important people understand that it's not just expanded hours here and there.
Sure. No, under HB3 as it is, it expands from 39 to 60 counties, which would have to have a minimum of 9 hours of early voting during weekdays, beginning at no earlier than, at 6 a.m. all the way until 10 p.m. And somewhere in there, they can find 9 hours that works for them. You also see an expansion on Saturday and Sunday early voting. And if you look in our state of Texas, we afford an abundant amount of opportunity for any voter to vote either on election day, which very little of our discussion has surrounded election day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., or these 2 weeks and this weekend of early voting that we afford those who do have busy lives and busy schedules to conveniently vote when they can.
So when you hear, Christian, that it's more counties getting a vote for more hours, that sounds like more voting opportunities to me. And I will tell you, the data I saw from my own county, Harris County, which had some of the broadest interpretation of rules, did not generate better turnout than other counties. In fact, it lagged behind a number of them. So the efficacy of some of those changes is questionable. as well. No, it's without question, it was a failure. But there's also questions about people wondering about the integrity, which is why we're saying let's expand it in a way that's uniform across the state. Very, very critical. We don't have any other hands up at this point, so I'm going to wrap us up. But I want to thank my colleagues for participating. I want you all to be assured that the House Republicans will continue to come to the Capitol every day, just as we have the entire special session. We would like to be in our communities. We'd like to be at our jobs. We'd like to be with our families, or maybe on a vacation to somewhere like DC. But we're here to do the people's work. And here's the bottom line. If a few more Democrats will come to work, we can pass these bills and avoid additional special sessions. To our colleagues, we say, come home. We'll leave the light on. Thank you.
All right, you just heard from the Texas House Republican Caucus putting out the call for their colleagues, the Democrats, to return to House chambers so that they can continue working on not just voting bills, but a number of other items on the agenda there. The Democrats have been in Washington, D.C. since July 12th. They say they will stay there, buying time, they say, for Congress to pass federal voting legislation. We have complete coverage of the Lone Star Showdown on khou.com if you would like to read more.